I'm very glad to be joining you. I was on the Caravan of Knowledge yesterday evening, so we're going to jump right into talking about our online and blended instructional practice. And we certainly know all over the world, since the COVID crisis hit several months ago, education has really shifted a lot, and there are more and more online models of education that are being started. My two children start school next week, and it's the new term, the new school year, and they are going back 100% online, at least for the first 6 weeks, and then they will reevaluate and make additional adjustments. And I know that some schools have gone back in person and then they've shifted back to online learning. And some schools are doing a hybrid model that's blended, where some is in person, some is online. And whatever the case may be in your situation, whether it is full-time remote, full-time face-to-face, or a combination of both, we're going to think about how we can improve our instructional practice through the use of technology, and to do that through the lens of that framework called SAMR, which some of you may be familiar with, and some of you may not, and that's okay. And I'm not exactly sure what was said about me to begin the introduction, but just to give you a little bit of background on me, I have been involved for about the past 20 years in a very authentic project-based approach to teaching. And I know that's the theme for you this week. And my educational background, specifically my doctoral work, is in online instruction, and to do that through that lens of an online authentic approach. And I've written a couple of books over the last couple of years, so we'll discuss some of what my work has been about over the last decade or so. To get us started, we are going to just very briefly take a dive into an article that I wrote with my Project ARC partner, Tim Kubik, about 1.5 years ago for ASCD Pakistan. They have a publication that they put out called The Reformer, and they contacted me one day and asked if I could write a piece on assessment. And so I decided that I really wanted to look at assessment being more than just a grade or a mark or a score, a percentage, a test at the end of a unit of study. And so what I would like you to do right now is think about how your students, your learners, are more than just that grade or that score or that assessment. And what kind of words or phrases would you use to describe your students as being more than that percentage, grade, mark, or assessment? So there were 3 main points in this article that we wrote. And first and foremost, we said that students really want real world challenges to engage with, things that have the potential for change in their world. So they want to solve problems that are happening around them. Secondly, we said that students really need the ability to show what they've learned through many different modalities, and to do it in many, many different ways, instead of just that test at the end of a lesson or at the end of the unit. And this allows us to really collect data that's related to our students' performance before they ever take a summative assessment so that we, the teacher, can figure out exactly what kind of instruction it is that they need. And then third, we said that it's really important to get feedback from a variety of people, whether it is the teacher, whether it's other students in the class, or if they are subject matter experts or technical experts that have content area expertise that is outside of the classroom. And that feedback really needs to be non-graded because it lowers the stress on the student, but it also improves the work that the students do. And especially working with those subject matter experts, we have to consider the fact that most educators are educators by choice and by training. And many educators never worked in the world outside of education. So for example, myself, I taught for many years a class on law and how laws are made, and both criminal law, and here in the US we call it civil law as well. But I am not an attorney. I don't have the ability to go out and practice law and give legal advice to individuals or represent criminals, but I've read an awful lot about law. But if I work with an attorney or if I work with someone in law enforcement, they can give better feedback to a student because of their experience than I personally could. So that non-graded feedback is very essential. Those are the three main points, and you'll have access to that article that perhaps you can have translated and take a look at a little bit later on after the presentation. So as we think about our learners being our bright future, or individuals with life goals who have lots of emotions and that we can actually see the learning that comes across in their eyes, we really want to think about how we can help our learners think more critically as we design authentic project learning experiences for them that empower them, and to do so in such a way that utilizes technology. So there are a couple of main points here to consider as we move forward and think about these technology pieces that we're going to jump into in just a moment. First and foremost, what is authenticity? So we're trying to think about authenticity so that we are connecting our content that we're teaching our students to the real world. And we want to do that in such a way that it connects to our community, whether that be our school, our local community, our country, and it could even be our global community if we then also add the relevancy piece so that it becomes very meaningful for our learners. Because if I'm working with my students here in the United States, in my little piece of the United States, they may not be concerned with what is happening all the way across the country in California. They may not be concerned with what's happening in Asia or in Europe, unless I can make that relevant for them. So I have to figure out a way to make it meaningful for my students. And then finally, I need to ensure that we are hitting levels of complexity because we have a learning ecosystem that interacts. So we have those students, we have their peers, we have the teacher, we have those technical experts, and we're connecting them through technology, because at the core of all of this, we need to focus on our learners. So we, the teacher, are experts in the content, in instruction, and how we facilitate and teach. Our technical experts are able to co-design with us authentic learning experiences, as well as provide feedback to our learners. And then the technology really allows us and gives us a vehicle to help to create documentation of the learning for our learners to publish what they have learned, and to also network with other individuals so that we are supporting our learners through this process. Now, hopefully you've noticed that as I've been going through the slides, there have been these little icons to the left of the screen, and those icons are what we at Project Art call our stages of project assessment. And now I wrote about these stages in a couple of the books that I wrote. Here's one of them that came out just about a year ago. And these stages of project assessment are what we're trying to figure out what our students need at any given time when they are involved in a project. And the way I described it last night to participants was to think about your smartphone that you have. Now, we know that the companies, the technology companies that are creating these smartphones, their challenge is to try to get us, the consumer, to buy the latest and the greatest and the best smartphone. That's their challenge. They want to do it because they're trying to make money. That's their purpose. So we start with a challenge and a purpose for our learners to solve a problem. And in just a moment, you're going to look at a challenge that I created when the COVID crisis hit. And I said, okay, we need to restructure our education system and infrastructure. So there are lots of different challenges that we are engaged in as we walk through our daily lives. And those challenges connect back to our content. And so we set the challenge and the purpose for our learners, just like our smartphone. And then these technology companies, they have to figure out in the next stage in inquiry and ideas, well, what is it that our consumers want? Do they want a bigger phone? Do they want a phone that takes better pictures? Do they want a phone that has longer battery life? And in this stage, then they do a lot of research to find out what the answer is to that. And as they're doing the research in the next stage, they have to figure out context and perspective. You know, am I trying to market to someone who takes a lot of photos? Or am I trying to market to someone who may be older and not as able to use the technology very quickly? Because depending on the context and the perspective of the user, we might have very different outcomes. Then we move into actions and consequences as the next stage, because our phone companies are going to take a certain action and there's going to be a consequence for it. So if I build a better battery into my phone, the phone might be heavier. Or if I have a better camera, I might need a slightly larger phone. And will someone want to buy a heavier phone? Well, they want to buy a bigger camera or a bigger size phone. So there are consequences to our actions. And then ultimately, we have to choose a solution as we look at the options that we have. And we also, if we're trying to sell our phones, we know that there need to be opportunities for us to continue to improve the phone so that the next version is bigger and better and people still want to buy it. So as we think of these stages of the project assessment, that's really what happens in any authentic project that we give to our learners. And these stages really set us up to think about how do we want to assess using technology. And so we're going to take a look at these technology tools that we can utilize for assessment purposes. And we're going to use a framework that's not created by me, but by Dr. Ruben Puentedera, and it's called the SAMR model. And so the levels of the SAMR go like this. The first level is substitution. It means you exchange one tool for another tool. And I typically use the example of the pencil in my hand. I used to handwrite on paper an essay that I might write and turn it in for a grade. But with the use of computers, I can now type my essay in a word processing document and turn it in to my teacher through email or through, say, a Google Drive folder. It's a direct substitution. We can level up to higher pieces of technology in augmentation and how we use the technology to where it's still a direct tool substitution, but there is some improvement. So if I'm going to utilize a word processing document, let's say Microsoft Word, I'm typing it, just the substitution, but when I turn it into my teacher and my teacher gives me feedback or comments, and I can respond to those comments, now there is a functional improvement. Then we move to modification, and this is more of a significant task redesign. So if I'm using, say, a Google Doc that I am co-writing, and not the book that I shared just a moment ago, but a book that I wrote in 2017, I co-authored with someone, and we wrote the entire book in Google Docs. I had a color, she used a color as we were typing, and we would go in and we would change sentence structures or add pieces. And then as we were collaborating on that, we would have a Zoom meeting like this, and we would make decisions on what we wanted to include in the book. And when we were ready to make a decision that we said this is good to go, we would change our colors to black because it meant that it was ready. So that's a modification because we have a significant task redesign where I would not previously been able to co-author a book with someone who lived 3,000 kilometers away. And then finally, we have redefinition here as we create new tasks that previously we were unable to do. And through redefinition, we might be creating a wiki of sorts where we have new content that we are adding together and collaborating on with people from all over the world. So if you were to get online and look at Wikipedia, that information is information that it is brought together in one place and space by thousands and thousands of people as contributors. The goal, of course, is to get to that redefinition space as we use our technology tools, but there are some times when we have to use substitution or augmentation or modification. So I'm going to provide you with a copy of this infographic, and that I'm hoping someone can do the translation on. But there are two pieces to the infographic, and we're going to use this infographic as we talk during the rest of this presentation, as we think about what it is that students need in order to become advocates and self-directed learners, but also what we can use as teachers to help manage the process as our learners become self-directed. And so we'll look at a lot of different examples, and all of the examples that we're going to take a look at are hyperlinked in this infographic that you will have access to. And I will say that all of those tools that we're going to take a look at as well are free tools. So as we look at these tools, I wanted to share with you these tools through the lens of a project, an authentic project that I created at the start of the shutdown of all the schools here in the United States. We shut down in mid-March, and it was about a week later that I realized we had a very authentic challenge on our hands that our learners could be solving, and thinking about how can we rebuild the infrastructure of our country. And it could be here in the US, and it could be any other country in the world, including Kazakhstan. But we need to rebuild our infrastructure so that we can handle a future worldwide crisis. So it could be in the field of education. It could be transportation as infrastructure. It could be food distribution networks. As I was mentioning to the group yesterday, here in the US, we don't usually think of running out of food or food shortages. But in March, we had lots of food shortages. There are still things today that I cannot get at the grocery store when I put in my order. Because the network of the food distribution still has not caught up since the shutdown that we had in mid-March. So I wrote this project, and there is a link there, and I will also send out the link so that you have it, that you can take a look at the project in more detail. And this project specifically was designed in a learning management system called HeadRush. So first, we're going to take a look at the agency for our learners through writing and discussion. And in writing, I already talked to you about this lens as I discussed the SAMR framework, so I'm not going to go over that piece again, but I'm going to jump down here and talk to you a little bit about discussion. So here we are on a Zoom meeting. I'm just talking at you. We had a little bit of a small group chat where I asked you the question at the beginning, but I'm really using this as a substitution tool instead of being in the same room as you. Certainly it has its benefits because it brings the world together very nicely, but at the same time, it's just substituting for me hopping on a plane to come and visit you, which would be lovely to do, but I don't see that happening anytime soon because nobody wants Americans to come and visit right now. As we move into the augmentation space, then we could use something like Padlet. And if any of you like to write notes on little pieces of paper, this is the way to do it online, so that I'm writing a virtual note and I'm sticking it to my virtual wall, and I can post comments. I could create hyperlinks to websites. I could add pictures. I could add videos, and it's just not me participating in this. It could be all of my students adding comments to the wall. So we've got a functional improvement on what's happening here as they're collaborating with one another and sharing their thoughts and their ideas. As we get into modification, we have something called back channel chat. So on Friday, I have a group of teachers from Los Angeles, so across the country from me, and we are going to watch a video together, about a 15-minute video. And as we're watching the video, we're going to have a back channel discussion that we are thinking about the different parts of the video. So where a teacher previously might ask students to watch a video and write down 10 main facts and then turn in those facts to the teacher, now we've got some big improvements here because we're collaboratively discussing online while we're listening and watching the video. And then finally, in Redefinition, we have a tool called Etherpad that you can download to your computers for free. And instead of like in Google Docs, where you have multiple people collaborating, but you can't tell who wrote what, unless you go back and you look at the history. In Etherpad, everybody that is in the same document is automatically color-coded. And so I can tell based on the color coding that occurs who wrote what, when, and we can have a conversation that is written now instead of a verbal conversation. And once the conversation is over and finished, I, the teacher, can go back and I can replay the conversation to see how the conversation unfolded. And in the project for infrastructure, I created an option to use Etherpad, in which our students would then use Etherpad to actually share some ideas for potential solutions that they might have to improving infrastructure within their country. Then we get to presentation and curation. So for presentations, obviously here I'm using PowerPoint as I'm sharing these slides with you. It's very one-dimensional. It's not interactive at all. However, I could have my students create a talk that they might share, and there is TED Ed Talks. And many of you are probably familiar with the TEDx. So instead of just sharing slides, now we are sharing the slides. We're talking with the slides. We're giving a big motivational presentation, and that can be shared with people all over the world. In modification, we could use something called Bulb that creates a story of our learning via these portfolio submissions, so that it's not just an end piece presentation, but I have multiple pieces that are turned in throughout the process, that feedback is provided, and I can watch my learners grow as they solve their authentic challenge. And then finally, in Redefinition, we have the Fixperts. And this is a documentary film that students create as they solve their problem. And the Fixperts, they're a British group that have just done wonderful things as they use design thinking to create anything from someone who cannot write and creating tools to help them hold a pencil so that they are able to write again, to creating prosthetic arms for amputees. And then we have curation for student agency, where we might be at the very most basic piece, linking back to sites that we might need our learners to utilize as they are investigating the authentic problem that they are tasked with solving. We could move up into using our tools where our students are now collecting notes and photos and typing and doing sketches. But we might want them to get into the piece where they are actually working together to create a mind map, so that I, the teacher, can do an assessment to see where their thinking processes are going. And I might use Poplet for that. And then finally, at the redefinition phase, we're using Open IDEO, where we can collaboratively solve a problem. And as we're solving that problem, we are sending out to Open IDEO to get feedback from a community of learners. That previously was something that we would not be able to do without that technology tool. And in our infrastructure example here, we might use Poplet to give us the visual representation of what the plan is to solve our challenge for our infrastructure issue. So that was a look at the learner agency piece. Now we're going to jump into the teacher practice very quickly, and we're going to start with lessons. If I want to teach a lesson to my learners and I want them to be able to watch it on their own, I could use something with like Screencast-O-Matic. I create a PowerPoint presentation and I talk them through the presentation, and it's a video and they can watch it when they want. A direct substitution for me being in the classroom. Hopefully, though, we could get into some interactive lessons with quizzes with something called Nearpod. But if we really want to level up our process, we can use asynchronous debates through our global youth debates, where my students here in Pennsylvania in the United States could connect with your students in Kazakhstan, and they could be debating back and forth, even though we are in 2 different time zones. And then finally, we have Solvably, where we have problem-solving challenges that are up on the web, and you can work with groups from all over the world to solve those problems. With the management tools, I might simply just need to send a reminder of a due date, and that would be using something like Remind, where it would pop up on my phone to say, Dayna, you have this due tomorrow. It's just a reminder. But I could use something like Trello, which gives me a task board where I have categories of tasks that need to be complete, and I can manage my process that way because it's a good visual cue of what needs to be done. I could move into using Google Classroom to enhance the collaboration and communication through the Google suite of tools that we have. However, if I want to plan with those technical experts that we talked about before, I might connect with real world scholars that would give my learners the web space to create, they could create products that they are selling, and individuals could buy those products from the web, and the technical experts would give them feedback in the process. So for my infrastructure project, I might want to work with those technical experts, with real world scholars, to provide my students with feedback to make sure that the final product that they are creating is one that would be a feasible possibility to make change. As we think about the data that we might use, most of us use spreadsheets and have used spreadsheets for a long time as just a replacement for a grade book. But if we want to have an interaction with our data, we could use something like Tableau. If we want to manipulate our data, we could use Tuva. But if we really want to level up the process, not only can we manipulate data, but we could test out our hypotheses and our ideas using Data Classroom. So we're leveling up each layer of the data in that category. And then finally, for assessment, a lot of teachers like to use Kahoot because it's a very quick way to know if our learners have understood a lesson, because we give them a quiz and they input the answer, and we get a graph that tells us how many individuals got it right, how many individuals got it wrong, and it's a competition to see who gets the most answers correct and to do so the fastest. We could use something like Edpuzzle, however, to increase the complexity. As our learners watch a video, and we have embedded in the video quiz questions. So we watch a segment of the video. Here's a quiz question. Let's see if you got the answer right before you're allowed to move on with the rest of the video. Of course, we could use Google Forms to give us immediate feedback on surveys or quizzes that we want to create, and it will give us some data analysis so that we can decide what next moves we need to make with our learners. But if we use something like Flipgrid, we could have our learners create a very short video, 1 to 2 minutes perhaps, and that video can be shared with the rest of the class and with the teacher. And those peers now can give feedback by leaving a video clip as a response to say, here are my suggestions. And then I, the teacher, can see all of the feedback that was given and see whether or not that student then improved their work. So I might use Data Classroom or Tuva to create some lessons on data collection as we want to increase and improve the infrastructure for our country. So as we think about rebuilding our country's infrastructure to handle a future worldwide crisis and the different technology tools that we could utilize to improve the assessments that we're doing in either a remote or a blended or even a face-to-face classroom experience. If you are interested in taking a look at a little more detail and having some translation occur, you can send me an email personally, and we can get you into HeadRush which is the learning management platform that we use to create this project. And HeadRush is the only one of the tools that I shared that actually has a price tag, that does not have a free version of it, but the my friends at HeadRush have said that I can give you some free access to take a look at the project and play around with HeadRush as a tool as well. So on that note, that is my email. If you would like to send me an email to ask anything specific, but if you do have some questions, I think we have about 5 minutes or so that we still have before the next presenter will be on and we start to transition.